Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Steve Newbold and I've been working in the defence industry for almost 35 years. I currently work as a senior ILS manager within NDMA Air Systems in Norway. Prior to that, I was in the British Army within the REME, where I started off as an apprentice and ended up as an OR9 or WO1, initially within the DPA, but migrating over to DENS. Last month, I was asked to give a brief presentation on the positives and successes of ILS. My initial thoughts to this were that it presents two problems. Firstly, it can prove somewhat challenging to focus on the positives, as ILS requires one to think of possible ways that things can fail, and as such is often perceived to be negative or pessimistic. I frequently explain that we need to plan for operating in the worst case, war, and not just plan for the best case, a benign training environment. And negative thinking and planning for war is hardly an upbeat starting point. But that said, I thought I should and could give it a go. I thought it would be good if we looked at a specific project and showed where and how ILS succeeds and truly adds value. But I didn't want to look back and cherry pick one of the best projects from the handful that I consider to be truly outstanding in terms of their chosen ILS solution, as that's perhaps a little unfair. It'd be more realistic just to look at a project at random, show how ILS has and will add value, even if you don't have the opportunity to complete all of the ILS analysis preferable. When applying ILS, it doesn't matter if we can only influence the spares, the transportation, the facilities, or any other of the ILS elements, as they all add value. If there's any sort of magic key for success, it's sticking with the principles of ILS, and that will ensure a positive difference. But that said, which project do I choose at random? Now, as the majority of ILS projects I'm involved with begin in a similar way, after a short introduction or a discussion with the project team, or even a presentation where I explain what ILS is and how it attempts to address the support issues in a joined-up approach. And then often as the project manager and the team will all agree wholeheartedly about the obvious benefits that can be achieved, we start to progress, and the ILS team start to ask for more detailed information, the operational profile, the mission profile, concept of operations, etc., etc. And slowly the difficulties begin, with vague answers to these questions often becoming less and less clear, and the potential support solutions not being narrowed down as a consequence, so the frustrations can begin. The project team simply want to deliver the equipment, and can often see the ILS issues as an overcomplicated hindrance. But ILS is not complicated, it is complex, and the ILS team will assure you that alone equipment delivery will not make a capability, and we passionately want to transform that equipment delivery into a fully operational capability. But to do this requires detailed answers, financial investment, and often projects are lacking some or all of these, and have a limited understanding of the complexities, and that the majority of project costs and through life costs are the support costs, and investing resources and money up front will pay dividends through life. Now, I'm aware this isn't always a common understanding, and that many people out there simply don't understand the bigger picture, and that unfortunately ILS may seem as a frustrating experience instead of the true value-adding success story that it actually is. During this process, I took time to consider all of the projects I've ever been involved with, and I can say without a doubt that the application of ILS has added significant capability to them all. And I'm not saying that they're all perfect, or that there wasn't and isn't the opportunity for improvement. Hindsight is a wonderful way of contradicting chosen support solutions. But I am saying that if these projects hadn't had ILS considerations, in some cases forced upon you, that they would all have been significantly worse off in terms of increased cost or reduced operational effectiveness. And in many cases, they could have unnecessarily put lives in danger. And this positive impact of ILS, this reduction of the risks, even though it can sometimes be difficult to measure, is in my opinion the biggest success and something we should truly celebrate. So with that in mind, I thought this presentation should focus on the individual ILS element successes, which together add up. And as I said, instead of basing it on a preferred past project, I wanted something more realistic. So what could be more realistic than one of my current projects, which is typical of defence-based projects, in so much as it's short on time, money and support details. And all of these issues must be overcome in order to provide the best support solution and capability to defence. But I also said, when I was first asked to deliver this presentation, that I had two concerns, and having already mentioned the first, it now brings me on to the second. I was asked to provide a brief presentation, and those that know me will know that I'm a details man, as I believe it's only by getting into the details will one discover the issues and develop potential solutions. So for a change, and on this occasion, I'll try and keep things as short as possible. So a little background to the requirement. In 2001, Norway agreed to procure 14 NH90s, with all of them to be delivered by 2008. The first NH90 was not delivered until 2011 and wasn't operational before 2017. Now, unfortunately, for various reasons, which I'm sure will be discussed and argued for many years to come, things didn't really improve. And in June 2022, Norway announced it will terminate the contract and started a legal battle with NH Industries. What's interesting here is that ILS is put in place to reduce through-life costs and increase operational availability. Now this, ironically, is the two things that a quick search on Google will show you that the NH90 struggled on. So in March 2023, Norway contracted for the delivery of 6 MH60 Romeo Seahawks through an FMS case. The first aircraft delivery was originally planned for 2025, which really didn't give much time. But fortunately, in terms of developing a support solution, delivery has already slipped to the right and is now planned for Q3 2026. So as you'll see from the dates, there wasn't much time, and the biggest risk of a support solution is still that the aircraft will arrive on time. But as the project team keep reminding me, this is an FMS case with an already proven support solution that's currently in use with the US and others, so it should be straightforward to develop a Norwegian specific support solution. But my answer to that will always be, well, perhaps, and I agree that the ILS effort must be tailored accordingly. But at this point we don't know, and we should continue to ask our US partners as many support-related questions as possible as part of the RFI process. I actually see it as a small win when our US partners remind us that we still have over 300 RFIs unanswered, which is keeping them very busy. But whilst it's true that an FMS case reduces support risks, it's also true that it reduces the ability to influence the entire support solution. But that said, it can work well if one is able to follow the exact tried and tested and proven existing US support solution and mirror this, keep any design changes to the minimum. But as I've already said, this is not what Norway intend to do. So having just mentioned that the risk to support would be reduced if we mirrored the US aircraft design and their existing solution, but Norway wasn't doing this. There are significant differences: the operational profile, the cold and extremes of weather, smaller ships, less maintenance personnel on board and on land, different trade groups, as well as major helicopter design differences, including the decklock system, and these will all have an impact. It's also easy to overlook that because NH90 had failed, for whatever reasons, to deliver for over a decade, that the in-place logistics solution had slowly been reduced over the years to reflect the reduced flight hours produced. NH90 was intended to produce around 4,000 flight hours annually, but typically it achieved less than 700, and as such, over the years, the support solution has shrunk to fit. So with the procurement of Seahawk, there would be a real desire and possibility to increase achieved flight hours, and this will put a strain on the already in-service support, which is already dealing with additional pressure due to immediate need to start training and increase in size and scale to suit a very different airframe. When you combine this with the decision to expedite the procurement process and to deliver and integrate into service a fleet of aircraft within 2 to 3 years of LOA signature, well, it's very ambitious and has meant that time is also a significant constraint. But it's always understood that the ILS effort must be tailored to suit each project and its various constraints, and this project isn't any different. And as is normal, it too was constrained by costs, limited resources. I mean, in terms of resources, at the time of LOA signature, the project team and its US counterpart team were not even fully manned and were still actively recruiting. But it wouldn't be an ILS presentation if at some point I didn't mention some of the other frustrations. But it's important to mention what it was that ILS needed to overcome. At the beginning of a project and in terms of ILS, one produces the ILS strategies, plans, and continues with other documents, like the use study. However, upon drafting these documents and sending them out to all stakeholders for the questions asked to be addressed, it became apparent that others outside the ILS chain didn't see the relevance or importance and were very focused on the contractual issues, ensuring the aircraft could be procured and delivered to this very short time frame. And the assertion remained that as the MH60 Romeo was merely replacing the NH90, then it would be a very simple support solution, as we could use the same people, infrastructure, facilities, special tools, test equipment, etc. And only a little training, it would all be resolved. Now this isn't an uncommon issue that ILS has to overcome, but if you follow the process, ILS does and will continue to work its miracles. It's also worth mentioning that Norway doesn't have a preferred standard for ILS. It could be argued that it pays lip service to the formal ILS process as defined in any given international or military standard, and this is something that I'm hoping to change. But Norway attempts to make up for this lack of process by employing extremely intelligent and hard-working people, even if they can be much more comfortable making compromises on some of what I consider to be the most essential supportability requirements. Now, as such, all of the ILS successes came after some at times fairly intense discussion between the ILS team and the wider stakeholders, and this is, in my experience, very normal, as the multifaceted complexity of ILS is often seen as adding complications. But good ILS is all about the details, so despite this being viewed by many as a simple exercise of swapping one aircraft for another, it was never going to be that straightforward. And with the application of ILS and the consideration of each ILS element, successes have already been achieved, and many more are planned to be completed prior to the aircraft delivery. So where to start? Publications. Sometimes things are obvious, even to the non-ILS specialist. Accessing new publications, for example, and the infrastructure and considerations required for this in terms of the IT, the laptops, the power, the networking and security, etc., to mention but a few. But it was a fairly straightforward process and involved simply adopting the US solution. And although financially this was still a significant investment and somewhat more expensive than had initially been considered, as US publications need to be redacted and fit the Norwegian maintenance policy by our US partners prior to issue, but this did give access to the required publications to suit the Norwegian maintenance policy, so I still call it a win for ILS. But other concerns were not so obvious. The storage warehouse. The ILS team were reminded that there already existed a perfectly good storage warehouse, and this had been successfully used for NH90 for many years. But as I had seen it firsthand, I knew that this was already an aged facility. It was not ideally suited for the storage of aircraft components, insomuch as its size and access were not particularly good, and there had also been a number of historic examples of items corroding whilst in this store. So it was clear to see that a better CHE and more modern facility would pay dividends. Now, fortunately for the team, there was an opportunity to combine this new enhanced spares storage need with some other ongoing projects and combine them to reduce the direct project costs while still gaining a newly refurbished on-site larger storage facility, a definite successful application of ILS. So this brings me on to the workshop facilities. Now the ILS naysayers were still keen to point out that we had a brand new dedicated workshop built so we could just use this. But after going through some fairly basic ILS processes, including a site survey, it became apparent there would be many changes needed. The two aircraft were of course very different, not just constructed of different materials, which would require different repair methods, but owing to their different designs, they would need to be parked in the opposite directions. This would of course impact on the extraction systems and the power point locations, not to mention the fact that the power requirements for each aircraft and their relevant support tools and ground equipment were also very different. So as a consequence of undertaking various rudimentary ILS processes, it had been possible to identify and plan for a resolution of many support issues well before the aircraft were due to arrive, and this is the purpose of ILS, and again another simple but critical success story for ILS. The maintenance personnel. This was and continues to be a prickly discussion point. The requirement to increase the number of maintainers. The counter-arguments were many. Surely we were buying the Seahawk because it was more reliable than the NH90, and therefore it was not unreasonable to assume that if Norway already had enough maintainers for NH90, it would have more than enough for the MH60. But this assumption required some simplistic analysis to demonstrate its flaws. Firstly, because of the mean man-hours per flight hour for Seahawk was significantly higher than that used to plan for the NH90, the US provided a figure of 17.3 mmH as opposed to NH90's requirement of 2.6 mmH. And although experience demonstrated that the contracted mmH for NH90 had never been achieved, the size and scale of the maintenance organisation had still been based upon it. So this increased planning metric from 2.6 to 17.3 alone demonstrated an increase required to the number of maintainers. But secondly, the introduction of Norwegian specific systems such as a deck lock and other specific modifications had not been included in this already increased mmH figure. And lastly, because NH90 had actually flown so little over the last decade or so, there appeared to be a surplus of maintenance personnel. So this only reinforced the initial thoughts. And again, owing to the low number of flight hours achieved by NH90, this labour pool had already been through a number of streamlining events to further reduce its numbers. This would require an increase to rectify. So training was another quick win for ILS, and the team were quick to find numerous opportunities, not just to request relevant training from the US military, but also to find opportunities with our Danish neighbours, who currently operate the MH60 Romeo. And Norway were quick to send maintainers to work alongside their Danish counterparts, and thus start the maintainer training process as soon as possible, and also to request and to gain access to the Danish full motion simulator for ongoing pilot training needs. So tools. The need to consider funding, not just for ground support equipment, special tools and test equipment, but also additional funding for general service tools. Now in hindsight, everyone can fully understand. But at the time, the ILS voice is often a lone voice that appears to be just adding complexity. But it's these layers of simple complexity or analysis that identify straightforward support considerations. And in this case, the NH90 is a metric aircraft, whilst the Seahawk is imperial, thus requiring new general tools to be procured for an increased number of maintainers. This is proving to be a significant investment in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, with lead times for some basic tools measured in years. So it's the early application of ILS that has prevented this from being a real showstopper, another success story for ILS. Spares. As is usual in an FMS case, a recommended spare parts list is provided by the US that has been ranged and scaled according to the use and operational profile provided. Now, rather than just accept this recommendation, Norway elected to go through that fun process of line-by-line analysis. Now, I can't stress enough how time-consuming but important this process is. It ties in with all of the other support elements. Once we understand the range and scale of spares and their storage needs, we can plan effectively for the storage requirements. We can ensure that we have the correct spares to match the Norwegian maintenance policy. We can plan for how the inventory will be managed and maintained during storage, and how these maintenance requirements will be flagged and undertaken. It's also, needless to say, a very useful exercise, and hundreds of thousands of dollars were saved by removing erroneously included but recommended spare parts. But at the same time, it also highlighted many missing items, and these would require some additional investment. Fortunately, the project manager could easily understand the risks and was able to work the required magic to increase the spares budget. This was no small feat, as it required a near doubling of the costs anticipated for the initial 2 years' worth of spares. But because the review had been conducted, it would give time to order any long lead items before the aircraft arrived, which is understandably critical to ensuring the aircraft can make an immediate impact upon the imminent arrival. This, without doubt, is the most significant ILS success in terms of increasing operational availability. Now, I'm aware that to any seasoned ILS practitioner, all of this just seems like straightforward ILS and business as usual. And to be honest, that's the point. This is one of the best things about ILS. It's about considering all of the potential supportability issues and resolving them at the earliest possible opportunity, ideally in design phase, but certainly long before the equipment is delivered to the user, as this will reduce system downtime, it will reduce costs and increase equipment availability. But what we don't do often enough is take time to consider these simple improvements that ILS makes and celebrate how it transforms an equipment into a military capability. It's also important to not limit the success of ILS to the deliverables within this project. And although these individual successes are very significant to the Seahawk, they've also been seen to have a wider impact on the procurement process in this project. And the creation and structure of the ILS team has already been suggested as a model for up-and-coming future procurements, as NDMA has recognised the benefits of investment into ILS. And as such, it's planned that future teams will see an increase in dedicated ILS resource, and NDMA will shortly be recruiting more ILS personnel. Now, that is a success story worth celebrating. So in summary, whilst we haven't had the time to go through all of the details of Norway's MH60 Romeo specific solution today, what we have done is highlight the impacts and successes to date that ILS has had so far on this project. Now, it would be naive to think that all the work is done and there'll be no future need for support considerations, but that wasn't the purpose of today's presentation. Today was all about taking a moment to stop and reflect, and instead of, as most ILS practitioners do, continually highlight all the ongoing and newly discovered support risks to a project or programme and then try to develop support solutions to these still extant risks, it was about reflecting on the ILS wins and successes that we've achieved to date, and even though many will often forget where or how these risks were identified and minimised, it's important to celebrate the positive impact that ILS has had. And within the military setting, it does so much more than just achieve maximum value for money. It makes a significant difference to the continued risks that we ask our servicemen and women to take. It removes many potential failure modes to the support solution and ensures that the procured equipment, whatever it is, can continue to be available to make whatever military difference it was designed and procured and intended to deliver. So with that, I thank you all for your attention today, and sadly now I must progress onto the final slide of my presentation. My favourite feature of ILS is. So what's my favourite feature about ILS? Well, that's quite simple. It's how it transforms an equipment delivery into robust and a dependable military capability.